From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Canada podcast, with workplace mental health becoming a priority for businesses who want to retain staff and prevent burnout. This is the source of information for creating sustainable and psychologically healthy workplaces in Canada.
So welcome everyone to Psych Health and Safety in Canada podcast. And today I'm really thrilled to welcome Leslie Bennett from Mental Health Innovations. Now, Leslie is a multifaceted, multi-talented person. And when I was thinking about some of the things, when I first met Leslie, it was that she was doing a lot of work around teams and organizational culture. And she did a podcast with me, I think about 100 years ago on that. And since then has expanded to do so much more in her work, in her career. And so there's so much that we can share. But to start the conversation, Leslie, can you tell our listeners really about your journey to really get to psychological health and safety in the workplace and the things that you're doing today?
Sure. And thanks, Marianne. And I was remembering that first podcast. So I think we've both become wiser and perhaps more articulated since then. So excited to be here. I appreciate it. I think it needs to start just by stating I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder in 1997, and I was silent about that for the first 10 years of my diagnosis. And a lot of that was because of how scared I was about what actions or what impact would happen if I talked to my employer about my mental health. And so when you say sort of how did you get here? I think it's a really important piece, because when we have lived experience, we have an experience of what it means to work with a mental health diagnosis. And in that, there is a journey, as far as I can see, for individuals to really come to terms with how they relate to their own mental health, and then when they're willing or what they need to do about asking for certain accommodations, or at least talking about it in the workplace, and whether or not they choose to do that. And so I was an absolute no at the beginning. There was no way I was telling any of my colleagues, any of my bosses, anybody that I worked with. And mostly that was, I was going to be fired. I was going to be shunned from an industry that I truly adored. I happened to be a salesperson at the time, and I was convinced, because of the diagnosis, that if they knew I had that, they would take away the credit card, because one of the challenges with bipolar disorder often is a spending situation where you might overspend. And so I was convinced that I could not tell my employer because of these facts. And part of what happened for me was I was uneducated. Like, I'm so thrilled about what's happening now, because there's so much information in the industry and online about sort of our rights as somebody who has a disability. But at the time, I was not educated. I was so silent about my mental health that I didn't go and look for things, because, oh my gosh, imagine if someone saw me looking for a mental health piece of information, and what would that mean? And so once I did a little bit of work on myself and realized how I was relating to my mental health, I actually started talking about it. And I would say that really was a turning point for me in my life. Now, at the time, that was in 2007 when I started speaking about it publicly. And that was my story about being diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I didn't know, first of all, I didn't know the contribution that I was making to other people just by opening up. And that was extraordinary, the number of people who would open up as well. And then I started realizing that if I'm going to be talking about my mental health, I better be responsible for my mental health. And what I mean by that was, in the first 10 years of my life, I was taking my medication and seeing my doctor, but that was it. I didn't understand what sleep could do around my mental health. I didn't understand the impact food could have. I didn't understand mindset. I didn't understand that treatment wasn't only medication, that there are other things that I could be doing to really support my mental health, including, focusing my time and my attention on things, saying no to certain things, right? Keeping those boundaries in place. And so there was a real turning point for me in terms of going from being silent, and then all of a sudden I'm now public about it. And in my, I would say the first maybe sort of 5 to 7 years of being public about my mental health, I was doing a lot of self-development and self-awareness work in terms of, I said to myself, I cannot stand in front of a group of people and talk about my mental health if I'm not taking care of my mental health. And so I had this mind shift that happened where the self-care idea, and how sort of wide self-care can be in terms of the different areas of self-care, it really changed things for me, and it changed how I work and how I saw workplaces operating, and how individuals, whether or not they were out about their diagnosis, um, may or may not have been getting the kind of supports that they could have had. And so the idea of psychological safety was really, you introduced me to that through the standard. And but it was, a couple of years after I had come out publicly about it. And so the thinking that I could do a course where I understood and learned what the standard meant, how to present it to leaders in a type of sort of case study or business case for the workplace, so that individuals like myself could really be supported. Because that was two things that I had sort of separate. I really wanted workplaces and individuals really thriving in the workplace, whether or not they had a mental health, but certainly if they had a mental health diagnosis or challenge that they're dealing with. And then the psych standard came along, and it was this like really beautiful set of ideas that a workplace, can impact our brain. And if we can't see those risks, how do we know? And so it was this really nice sort of frame that you gave all of us. So thank you, and everyone that worked on that original committee for the psych standard. But why I love the standard so much is for an organization that doesn't know what to do, it really is a lovely roadmap to be able to start looking at, like, what are the things that we're doing in a workplace that could be impacting someone's brain health, whether or not they have a diagnosis. I mean, that's not even necessary in the psych standard. It's not about individuals lived their own mental health diagnosis. So I think that's the kind of an expanded version, but I had a commitment to having workplaces be, individuals in workplaces thriving. And then the standard came along, and it gave us this really nice sort of lens to look through. Oh, okay, so we can look at, harassment and bullying, and what is the policy around that? We can look at role clarification. Do I even know what my role is and what I'm accountable for? Well, if I don't, of course I'm going to be in chaos and uncertainty, and that's just going to impact my brain. So that's my answer, I guess, how I got to the psych standard.
No, it's great, Leslie. You're really making me think about how many other people are out there that have a diagnosis, don't feel safe to speak up about it. And I know I get leaders say to me, well, why didn't they tell me? Well, you've articulated why not. It's fear. But the thing about psychological safety is, if we do it proactively for everyone, then we can help prevent the worst effects of stress, especially to people who may be vulnerable because of a diagnosis. What would be your advice to leaders, to managers, to supervisors, if they suspect that an employee may have a mental illness, but that employee is not ready or willing to talk about it?
So my advice to leaders always is, there's a rehumanizing, or there's a normalizing of mental health that's required. And if people aren't willing to come forward, to me, that's an indicator of what's happening in the environment. So as a leader, what what I often want to be doing, and this is a daily practice for me in my own work, is role modeling what I want my employees or my colleagues to be doing. So I ask for support publicly often we have these leadership scrums. And I want my colleagues and my employees to see it's okay to ask for support. I often will say, if someone were to look at my calendar, they would see that I have a therapy appointment in there. They see that I do a lot of self-care, and it's really important for me to do that. And as a leader, I've got to make sure that my mental health is supported. I think the other thing too, and this is a hypothesis that I have, and I'm not sure if it's grounded in anything, but it's, from my years of experience working in this industry. I have a feeling, and it comes back to where I was, how people relate to their own mental health, I think is going to be a driver in how they talk about mental health, how they react to other people in their mental health situations. And I know I related to my mental health as something that was flawed. I was broken. I didn't want anyone to know about it because somehow it made me less than. And that was a journey that I needed to go through and understand. But I wonder about that. I wonder how leaders are relating to their own mental health and what it means to them about it. And if they want other people to be doing and asking for accommodation or asking for support or coming forward, then I think it starts with them. I think it starts with the leaders.
Yeah, to be able to show that vulnerability. And speaking of vulnerability, you do the Brene Brown work on daring to lead, right?
That's right. I'm a certified Dare to Lead facilitator.
Yeah,
There's a title.
love her work. And my son, who is a computer programmer, went through that training, and I was kind of surprised that it's that ubiquitous that computer programmers are now talking about vulnerability, but I think it's a wonderful thing. Now, you also created or helped to create the Caring Culture Playbook. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So at Mental Health Innovation, so we've been in business for 10, actually this year is our 10-year anniversary, which is really exciting. And I've been with the company for about 7. And we never had an articulated, clear, effectively communicated way of saying from start to finish, here's what organizations can do to support the workplace mental health of their employees and their leaders. And so the Caring Culture Playbook is, it's been in development for 10 years based on all of the work that we've been doing and what we've been seeing in different organizations, what works, what doesn't work. And what we found out early on in our journey in the business was because most of the work that we do is surrounded around workplace peer support or healthcare peer support, we're often getting asked by organizations, can you come in and build a peer support program? And, we're always a yes to that. But when we start talking to them about, well, what's going on in your workplace? How are people relating to mental health? Is there mental health literacy? How does the leaders, what do they think about mental health? What sort of different things are in place? We found out that most organizations that want peer support haven't done the pre-work to lay the groundwork in the organization so that when a peer support initiative would be brought in and rolled out, that there was actual buy-in for that. And so there's 2 sort of pieces that are playing here. One is, testing for the readiness of the organization, and all of this is in the playbook. We've put it into 4 different steps. And then there's also, looking at it from the perspective of the culture. So I had experience early on in my career learning about organizational culture and what it means to have a strategy coming into an organization and whether or not that culture was matching the strategy, or was it below, or was it above. And so we know that, any strategy needs to have legs in an organization. And if the buy-in isn't there, it's unlikely to succeed. So when we're talking about mental health, or a peer support program, or any strategy as it relates to mental health, if the employee base is scared to talk about mental health, is afraid that if they show up to a mental health awareness session or something that has mental health in the title means that they have a mental health diagnosis, because I certainly have experienced that in my past where someone came into the room and said, someone just thought I had a mental health diagnosis because I was coming to this workshop. So there's some really important work that needs to be done to ensure that the culture is pulling for the new strategy. And so in our playbook, what we do is there are the steps of, okay, how do we relate to mental health in terms of the different ways? Are we an organization that looks at it from the clinical perspective? Are we just trying to check a box because we have to? Or are we interested in actually making change that's sustainable and people really getting supported in a way that's going to support their performance and support the overall vision of the organization? And that in itself, being able to assess those three areas is, to me, the first thing that needs to happen. So in the playbook, what you'll see is the first step is what we call a micro conference. And the micro conference is really talking at that top leadership level about how they think about mental health. And however people are thinking about it is fine, right? Like there's no right or wrong here. It's just from our perspective at MHI, we really know that there are organizations that are ripe for this, and then there's organizations that aren't. And if you're in the aren't section, it's not a problem because we have a way to get you there. And if you are, fantastic, it's an easier road to peer support. So the playbook lays out 4 steps. It's assessing the sort of the big picture perception around mental health. And then it goes down to the leadership level. So how are leaders supporting people around their mental health? Are they able to straddle the compassion versus compliance? Are they able to be in a conversation and not only have it be about what's good for the company, but also what's good for the employee? So there's some training and some work around that. And then the third stage is really giving employees the language, the space, and the structure to be able to just support their colleague, not in a peer support way, just generally being able to say, hey, Marianne, you were a little bit different in that meeting yesterday. Are you okay? And then mostly what we find is most people are scared about what you might say back to me, especially if you're not okay, because I feel like I might not be prepared or I wouldn't have what you need, and I don't want to fail that. And so the third step is really giving employees and the employee base language and ability to just, do that little bit of social support. So it's not peer support, it's just a little bit of social support and having all of the resources and support in the background for these individuals to refer to, which is, I think, just such a great place to start, or at least for the employee base. And then we say peer support is the 4th step. So you can see we're really interested in organization winning as it relates to support around employees. And based on our 10 years of experience, certainly the experience of Stefan in his past life, this sort of really testing for the conditions for success in the organization is so critical, because we have examples where that wasn't done and the peer support program isn't as successful as other places where it is very successful and that was done.
Right.
So we're really trying to have our clients and the workplaces that we work with be set up for success. And so that's what the playbook is all about. And it's a fabulous little PDF. You can download it for free. It's on our website. And then what you get in the background are about 6 different resources that will give you information, awareness, learning. And if you never call us, not a problem. You'll get value out of just downloading it. So
yeah, just using it. You know what I'm finding interesting, Leslie, is I think about Stefan. So for those that aren't familiar with Stefan Grenier, he's a retired lieutenant colonel with the Department of National Defense. And he early on kept talking about they need to reboot the workplace. They need to reboot it. And I'm thinking that's a very kind of military term. And so caring culture, I think that's quite the evolution from reboot, but it's the same thing, right? You can't put a Band-Aid on a broken leg. You need to really look at what's needed there. So I love that. Now, you were talking as well with this approach. You had told me that you've got several different ways that people can approach mental health, mental illness in the workplace. Do you want to talk a bit about what those are?
Yeah, thanks. And, so let me just say a couple of things first before I launch into that. What I love about MHI, and I started as an associate, I wasn't a partner at the time. It is such an innovative organization, but what comes with innovation means it's like what we did last year is not what we're doing this year, right? And what we do as a team, and we have a fabulous leadership team, and we've expanded our whole workforce. I don't know if you know this, Marianne. We started as a one-person consultancy, and in our 10th year, I think we're somewhere between 30 to 40 employees, associates, contractors, and our leadership team, which is, it was totally organic growth, right? Like we didn't really plan that, but here we are anyway. So we're very excited about it. So back to the buckets. So what we've realized is, and again, this is, our own perspective. It comes from industry experience. This is not researched anywhere, but what we see, because we interact with so many different types of clients and organizations. So we see there's 3 buckets, and there's 3 ways that organizations look at workplace mental health generally. There's organizations that I think they don't know what to do, and they're approaching it from a sort of a checking the box kind of perspective, which means, I'll do a lunch and learn about workplace mental health. We'll have some sort of awareness campaign, and we'll be wearing pins or bracelets or something like that. There might be groups of individuals who are talking amongst themselves about mental health, but the influence and the impact that these groups might have are not as high as what we would like. And so that's one bucket. And I think there's a lot of organizations that fall in that bucket, and it's an okay bucket to be in. And of course, we would want you to be in that bucket if nothing else was going on, right? Because we want organizations, whether or not you're connected to MHI, but we want organizations to be safe and a place for people who whether or not they have a diagnosis, can really be thriving. And so that's really important to us. So bucket number 1, fairly simple. There's not too much strategy behind it. It's sort of a bit more tactical. So that's bucket number 1. Bucket number 2, what we see is organizations have realized, okay, we actually need to do something now for our employees. What are we going to do? Let's bring in some individual who perhaps has a clinical background or has a medical background to talk to our employees about mental health. And what we find there is, and I certainly was in that bucket at one point in my life. I was doing workplace mental health awareness sessions for another organization, where I would go in and I would teach what the symptoms of depression were. I would teach what symptoms for anxiety was. I would talk, of course, the stats are very important. And, there might be something about the brain and how the brain works. And what we continue to find with that kind of approach is we're actually increasing stigma, because you now, as the participant, are listening and looking through the perspective of a clinical model or a diagnostic model at your colleague, which may not have your colleague go and get support because there's so much stigma around mental health. And so we call it the clinical bucket, but it doesn't mean that it's a healthcare situation. It just means the approach is coming from medical models versus the approach that we bring. And let me just say something about the clinical system. I would not be where I am right now if I did not have a psychiatrist, if I wasn't in the healthcare system, and if I wasn't, utilizing what the clinical system has. I'm just suggesting that in the workplace, we don't think it's the best approach to have people get the support that they need because of the stigma that arises from it. And so in the third bucket, and of course, we're very biased about this because this is our bucket that we live in, is we're interested in changing workplaces and really rehumanizing it from the perspective of, I don't look at you, Marianne, as through the lens of somebody who has depression or anxiety. I look at you as a human being who might be, challenged with some level of adversity at this moment, and that I could probably support you in some way, just like I would support my sister or my mom or my cousin, and so I'm not a therapist. I'm not asking anyone in a workplace to become a therapist. That's certainly not what we're interested in. But we do know that if we were to treat people as we do our loved ones in the workplace, life would be very different for people. They would likely stay at work longer. They would be, if you're talking about mental health early on, you're not having to go off work. You're getting the support you need early on. You're being referred to an EAP or somebody out in the healthcare system. So that all fits. It's just for us at MHI, and especially from the peer support perspective, we don't need to know what the diagnosis is. We just need to know that you're human. I'm human. You're having a challenge. I know what a challenge is like. Everybody knows what it's challenge. Everybody knows what stress is like, and that approach we find is really supports this place of being caring. We talk about a caring culture. Well, you can't have a caring culture if you're not being caring to the next person. And we don't want this to be hard or I have to figure out all these things before I can talk to someone. I think innately as humans, we have the ability to have empathy and compassion for someone else and for ourselves. And I think when we get into the workplace, so much performance is happening and we've got to do things all the time that this gets forgotten. And so that third bucket is where we often live. And I can just give you an example of a recent conversation that we've had with a couple of clients, which I'm not going to talk about who the clients were, but it might be just of interest. So, we were talking to an organization that had 16,000 employees in it. This is a huge organization. And they identified that they were in the third bucket, that they really wanted to be in the third bucket. But what they also realized was leadership wasn't there. And so what we're often doing is we're supporting organizations to influence and move folks from that clinical bucket or the awareness bucket into the next bucket that MHI talks about. And I, it's the work that we do. There's so many conversations that we're having around the perception that people have about mental health. And it's in the perception that's going to, I think, impact the way in which we can support people. And if the perception is that it's clinical, we know that's not going to necessarily work, as well as if we take the clinical out of the workplace and we treat people as human beings and we do what we would do for our loved ones.
Yeah, I always say it's not our job in the workplace to diagnose, treat, or counsel. But on the other hand, and this is the language that I use with some of the sectors that are not there, is that what we're trying to do is optimize the energy, the focus, and the commitment of every employee based on where they are that day. And if you look at some of the safety sensitive positions, so whether it's mining or it's energy or whatever, they have a real understanding that there's a connection between the focus that somebody has that day and accidents and injuries, and even illness. And so I absolutely agree with what you're doing. And I think that I probably was guilty in the beginning as well of thinking, okay, you need to understand, what these things are, and quickly found out that that's not the point. That we need a different approach than that. So Leslie, you had also talked to me about something that I think is more of an issue today because of the pandemic, because of some of the things that we have lost in our lives, in addition to losing people. Many people have lost their connections, they've lost their job, they've lost some of the things that were connected to their identity. And you have started up an approach to dealing with this more effectively in the workplace. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, sure. So, uh, I'll just do a little backstory on this first and then get into it. So, I was living in Toronto for the majority of my life. Have my husband and my family's all there. My dad got quite sick. He had been a smoker all his life. In the end of his life, he had COPD, which is an extraordinary illness to die from. Anyway, he passed away in October 2019. So my mom was still alive at the time with significant dementia. And so that was extraordinary for me. I had not been through that level of grief in terms of having a parent pass, and I had no idea what that was doing to me in terms of my brain and my focus and my ability to work. I remember early on when my dad had passed, I was like, oh yeah, I'll be back I'll be ready to go in 3 months, like 100% back at work. Which was like just so naive of me to even think that. I just had no idea what it meant to grieve a parent. Of course, this was before COVID, and so we had a celebration of life, which was extraordinary, and we had family around us, and it was a beautiful time. And then fast forward 12 months, and my mom passed away, and so and that was October 2020, and extraordinarily hard during COVID. My mom had dementia, and she was probably about 4 years in at this point. With COVID, of course, in Ontario, we were not allowed to go and see our family members in the homes at the very beginning of COVID. I don't know if you remember that.
Mhm.
And I had this little strategy where I knew my mom was uh, very set up in terms of her wishes, her final wishes. And one of them was that she did not want people to be feeding her. And so I had this little tactic where I would go in at lunchtime to the home and I would see her sitting in the dining room, and she'd be using her fork and she'd be eating her food. And so I knew she was, still with us for that moment, even though she may not be speaking to me or as aware as she would have been. And so COVID happened, and 6 months in, we were just doing Skype calls with our family members with the home. And uh, I realized one day I haven't asked them about whether or not she's feeding herself. And so I made a call and I found out that they were feeding her. And so that was the trigger to evoke her final wishes, which was, she didn't want to have anyone feeding her. And so we went through that process, and we were granted permission to go in and be with her for the last 12 days, which was one of the most extraordinary experiences that I've ever had. And when she passed, of course, it was a relief for us. Dementia is such a significant, challenging illness for family members to watch people go through. So that's the backstory. So it's a little heavy, and I apologize, but it's real life, right? Like
Yeah.
these are the things that we deal with, and we're trying to work at the same time. We're trying to do good work, and we want to support our people and all of those things. So when my mom passed, and having Stefan Grenier as the founder of this organization and my business partner, I just cannot ask for a better person to be in that position. He was on the phone with me constantly and making sure I was supported. And I did take time off, obviously, at that point when my mom passed, and I had with my dad as well, not to the same extent. But what I realized early on was like I wanted the structure of work actually helped me in my grieving process, and I knew I needed to be off work, but I didn't know how to balance those two things, because I might be writing an article on LinkedIn, and then that looks weird to the people who are at work because I'm actually doing something and I'm not like, so there was still this sort of, it was all made up in my own head. Of course, it wasn't any perception or judgment that my workplace was doing, but um, I started realizing that I needed support to get back to work. And so I've never had to ask for an accommodation or a return to work plan or be part of that in my career or my journey of having a diagnosis. I've been very fortunate to be, I had 2 episodes early on in my diagnosis in 97, and then I haven't had anything since then. And so I didn't really know what it meant to do a kind of a return to work with an accommodation because of something that's going on. So the grief itself wasn't triggering me in terms of my own mental health, but it was extraordinary. Like, it was another piece. And, not really having a lot of experience with that, I wasn't sure how to navigate it. And so I think I was talking to one of my colleagues at the time, somebody in the industry, and we just came up with this idea, like, what if Leslie, I could have a coach that was a return to work coach who understood grief and mental health to help me transition from being off work back into work. Because one of the things that I found very, very hard was when I thought I could, go back to work after my mom had passed, um, these really tiny, nuanced things would happen in an interaction in Zoom, and I'd be so like triggered, and it was so foreign to me because I could have been in that 6 months and it would have been fine, right? So there was these things that kept happening, and I realized I had to remove myself from doing any client delivery or client interaction. Facilitation I couldn't do. And so there was that realization. And then I thought, okay, so it would be helpful if I had someone supporting me who understood return to work, grief, mental health. And so, her, Donna Hardacre, was this person for me, which was brilliant. So we did our 6 sessions, um, and what I loved about how we MHI innovated around this was, I don't think this title exists. In fact, when I was talking to my psychiatrist at one point, I was talking to him about what I was doing, what I was up to, and I said, yeah, I have this return to work mental health grief coach who's working with me. Psychiatrist is like, oh, what's that? I've never heard of that before. And I was like, yeah, exactly. So there's this piece around this where I'm fortunate enough to have a level of awareness about my own health and what's in the industry to be able to have asked for that. I mean, this was not something that I saw on a website and was like, oh, I need that. We kind of created it as we went. But what it did was it allowed me to come to work. It allowed me to look at, where's my energy best spent given the grief that I'm going through. And this was invaluable for me, because I was thinking, oh, I'll just come get right back into it where I had left off. Not possible.
No.
The level of complexity that I think we have to deal with at times, piled on with grief, piled on with loss, piled on with uncertainty. I mean, everyone is going through uncertainty. And then, the fact that I'm dealing with my 2 parents who have passed, like, this was just overwhelming. So having this support was amazing. And then, I mean, this is where, none of us can skirt this feeling, I don't think. After the 6 sessions that I first did, I realized this is unbelievably valuable. I can actually work, I can grieve, I can take care of myself, right? So there was all these pieces that were falling into place. I was like, I think I need another 6 weeks or another 6 sessions. I was so scared to ask Steph to sign off on this because I was asking for myself. I mean, this is not a huge amount of money or anything. This is, because I'm asking for support for myself. And it's such a vulnerable place to have to ask for that, because of course in my mind I'm saying I'm not ready yet. I still need support. And by the way, my performance may or may not be at the level that you want it, or I think it should be at, or you would expect it to be at. He said yes right away. There was no reason for me to be scared about this, right? But it's this, like, there's so many lessons that I learned out of this. Can I lean into vulnerability and really show people what I need based on what's going on in my life? Can I be okay with not performing the way I was? Because you're just a different person when both your parents pass and you go through what I went through. You're a different person that, everyone's been dealing with this COVID thing. We're not the same as we were. And it was the best thing I did, and one of the most challenging things. But it showed me that when we talk about leaders leaning in, being vulnerable first, being the role model of what you need, hands down, this is the way we have to do it. Because if I'm not doing it, how is an employee going to be doing this with me?
Right.
So, yay, I get to go first, right?
Yeah, so many things that you said there, and I just want to unpack a few of them. That when we have a family member with dementia, we have the loss of the person we knew. And when it's a parent, it's the caregiver of us. We lose them earlier on. So you have that loss, and then you have the death. And it's interesting how complicated that can be, because we get confused about it. Like you say, well, there's some relief that they're not suffering anymore, but then there's guilt about relief because this was the person that was there for you. So that's always interesting. We have anticipatory grief. So in other words, we know that their end is coming, and we have all of that. And yet we're dealing with the uncertainty, like, how long is this going to be? And then you think, oh, how could I say that? But it is a normal human reaction. And then there's the whole, I have a reaction to the term bounce back, because it's what you said. You are not that daughter anymore in the same way. You can't bounce back to what you were, because you are not that anymore. You are something different. And I know we often hear, when am I going to, somebody just recently who lost someone really close to them said, I need to get over this. And you can't get over it. You need to integrate it into your life. And anyways, your loved one would not be happy with you getting over them. So it's kind of rude to do that, but we have to integrate it. And in speaking with some of my contacts and colleagues and friends in the Indigenous community, what we talk about is that we have to feel the loss. We have to feel the sadness. That's a normal thing. That is not a mental health issue. That is a normal human process. And the hope is that we have really what's called post-traumatic growth, where we start to move forward thinking about all the value that those individuals that we've lost gave to us, the happy memories, the wisdom, the love and care that they gave us, and that becomes what we think about when we think about them. But it's like everything else. It's a process. It's not, they're gone, I'm going to think happy thoughts now. I had the real benefit of my sister-in-law as a grief counselor. So intellectually, I understood the mind fog that would happen. I understood that I wouldn't focus. I understood that my level of compassion and empathy for others while I was in extreme grief was significantly different. In fact, Leslie, I kind of laughed at it because I knew what was happening, but it was somebody who would be telling me, about their hangnail or something that went wrong. And I'd be like, in my mind, yeah, I don't really care. I lost my mother. Like it was not like me to be less than empathic, but at the time it was like, yeah. And so I think there's so much to be learned. And the idea of having a grief return to work coach can normalize and validate all of that for us so that we can be gentle with ourselves and say, yeah, that's okay. That's all part of it. So did you, when you finished the second 6 weeks, and knowing Donna, she probably just treated you with love and care, because that's who she is. She's one of the most empathic people I've ever met. But what allowed you then to be the new Leslie and being able to step back into your role?
Yeah, I mean, we did a lot of reflection pieces. So, and this is like PSA, get yourself a coach, because this is what coaches do, right? It's the being able to reflect back and show progress. And I remember at one point we were talking about, so because I'm a coach, I took it very seriously and I did my homework, which isn't always what happens with individuals who take on a coach. But I was very, very passionate about it, and I wanted to be back at work. And so at one point, Donna said, "Okay, why don't you make a grief playlist on your phone?" Because what for me, I'd get into these moments, I'd just start crying. And I'd be like, the crying is interrupting my work. I can't get my work done because I'm crying. So there was this like, okay, why don't you have moments where it's like you get moved to tears about something so that you can express that piece that needs to come out. And not that I'm trying to control it, but it was a way for me to move through some of the grief process. So fine. So I made up this this grief playlist, and I was born in 1970, and I was like, well, why don't I just go to the 1970 playlist? And those are probably all the songs my parents were listening to at the time. And it was an unbelievable practice to do this. And I remember on my iPhone, it said grief. That was the name of the playlist. And within about a week, because I was like, I did not want to do this work. FYI, there was like a lot of resistance around this. In about a week to 10 days, I renamed it to Gorgeous Grief. And Donna's like, Leslie, this is transformational for you, because you were a no basically to doing this, and now you're relating to it differently. And so the question you asked, like, how did I know I was ready? I mean, I didn't really know, but what I had the benefit of is ongoing through the 12 sessions, we would look at how I was about something and then how I am now about it. And this to me was progress. Right? I still listen to that playlist to this day, and it moves me, and I cry, and I go, there's all these things that I do. So thank you, Donna. Right? Like, wow, what a brilliant thing. So yeah, that was one of the things that I think was an indicator where I could see that in the integration. And Donna is a brilliant coach, and she could articulate integration before I even knew there was integration, which was a really nice reflect back. And of course, that's what coaches are supposed to do for you anyway, to give you that mirror. There was one thing though that I realized sort of after. So because of course, if you have a parent who has dementia, there is a level of grief that you're going through when the individual's alive, as you explained so eloquently, Marianne. Thank you for that. The thing that I did notice though about my life is my life shrunk. So I could only manage, and granted, I was dealing with my father and my mother, who both had severe illnesses, but my life shrunk. So I didn't see friends. I didn't do certain things. My knee went out in 2017. I didn't really do what I should have done with my knee. Like, I'm now dealing with my knee. And I think one of the things for me that is also one of those indicators is my life got so small because of what I needed to do. And so the priority was eat, sleep, work, parents, right? And so friends, activities, all that stuff was sort of secondary or third. And when I started seeing myself not being so small in terms of my sphere, and it started doing this a little bit more, and I had this sort of interest in doing something else, this to me also showed that I was moving through the grief that was there.
I had the funniest thing, Leslie. I had this thought in my mind because I had been a caregiver for decades. And I had this thought that, oh my goodness, like I am completely responsible now for my happiness. There is no saying, well, I have to do this or I have to do that. And it's daunting to think that I'm completely responsible, but I flipped it now to go, ha, I can do whatever I want now.
That's right.
And but it took me about 2 years to get out of the mindset that I had to make sure every detail, around medication, around caregivers, around managing food and everything else. It took me about 2 years to sort of relax and go, no, you don't have to do that anymore. And so it is that integration, as you say, that we have to reinvent ourselves. And that some people can get stuck, right, in being the person with the loss instead of eventually figuring out how now to integrate what that person contributed to your life and honoring it by reinventing yourself.
We could do a whole podcast on grief or
Yes.
parents. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
we could,
Yeah.
we could, but we're going to run out of time. So I think that it's all connected because my focus, energy, and commitment at work and yours is going to be impacted by many things, and grief is one of them. And so if we're looking at psychological health and safety in the workplace, that's, we talk about, well, you want to bring your whole self to work. And I say, well, what if my whole self is a negative, miserable, angry person? Do you want me to bring that all to work? And of course, the answer is no, please don't. But when we talk about this, what we have to talk about is, given my state of mind today, how can I optimize my energy, focus, and commitment to the workplace? What do I need today to do that? What I want to look for from you is a way to describe a psychologically healthy and safe workplace in words that somebody who doesn't know the standard, they've never looked at Guarding Minds, they don't have the opportunity to work with mental health innovations. How would you describe what it feels like to be in a psychologically healthy and safe workplace?
So I'll speak from my experience of MHI, because I think we practice psychological safety as much as we can. And so the feelings that I have when I work with our teams there is supported. I feel seen. I'm asked about how I'm doing, and there's space for that. So I don't feel rushed in my answer. I see other people speaking about what they need and what they're going through separate from what's happening in the workplace. And so to me, there's cues there for me to be talking about that as well. We are kind to each other. We are direct with each other. We have the ability to use one of Brené's terms, circle back on a conversation with each other. We are individuals, so that you said feelings. So, well, there's something for us especially at our leadership team level, where we declare our biases a lot. So that often is what's spoken first, and then we're in a conversation about whatever the topic is, which allows everyone to understand the perspective. And so I think psychological safety allows for all of this. We take it very seriously about relationships. I believe that MHI is in the business of relationships as a way to talk about MHI. And we nurture relationships, whether it's our employees, our clients, our vendors, our contractors, our associates. And the nurturing of our relationships gives access to safety, I believe. We trust each other, and we work on that trust by being able to communicate with each other directly and to circle back and to, say the things that we need to say to be able to be present in the moment and all of that. I mean, I love this question because where my brain goes is like, well, let me tell you about the 13 risk factors. But no, the key is like, it's the feeling that the individual has, the safety that they can actually say, oh, another thing we do, this is another piece of this, is we can disagree with each other. And man, is that ever a lesson for me. So being able to disagree with my boss, Stefan, and still be in a conversation and still have it be safe, because of course, everyone's working on their own stuff and everyone has their own stuff that they bring to conversation. So it can be very challenging. And there's often a fear around disagreeing with the person that you report to wherever you are in an organization. And we have seen changes with our people. So at the beginning, people would not do it, and now they are doing it. So that tells me that there's a level of safety, psychological safety that's happening. We are constantly working on what's priority and what things can I take off the plate so that they can be focused on. And again, right, we're an innovative company. So the speed and the pace and the innovation that often happens can be overwhelming for some, especially if you want certainty in your role and your job. And all of a sudden we've pivoted to something else. So this is where we're always focused on, I remember at one point early on, I was like, Operation Stress Decrease was the name of the document, because we get to be influenced by the military because of stuff. And it was really looking at what's priority, what are we doing, what are we saying to the clients that we're going to fulfill on, and then what are the things that we can take off our plate, because we can't do it all. We're a small organization. We have a finite amount of time. We absolutely expect our organization to be taking time off, to be doing self-care, there's hardly ever when we're doing emails or work on weekends at MHI. And that is intentional because we know we need rest. And so that in itself brings psychological safety, right? I think there's like all these different factors that we could be doing as an organization. And just to be really clear, we don't have it worked out at MHI, but we are committed to the practice of it, and to be, once we know better, we do better. Right. Yeah. This is really the thing that we look for. And so, and do and take action around. So,
psychological health and safety is never done, just like occupational health and safety is never done. It's a journey. And we have to be aware of it every day. Safety is every day. So Leslie, thank you so much for all of this. If somebody wanted to get in touch with you, if they wanted to get in touch with Mental Health Innovations, how would they do that?
Yeah, it's super easy. Supportyourpeople.com, right? We just want everyone to be supported. Supportyourpeople.com. And we're on the website there. And you can also catch me on LinkedIn. My maiden name's there as well. So you know me from a past life. Find me pretty easily.
Yeah. So all of this there'll be some pieces of this on LinkedIn, and then the entire podcast will be on psychhealthandsafetycanada.com, and we'll get that out there to people so they can be inspired by all the different things you shared. So thanks a lot, Leslie, for being with me today and for sharing all of this, all the personal and all of the professional wisdom that you shared.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Canada podcast. To stay up to date with the best content on workplace mental health in North America, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and join the Flourish DX community at www.flourishdx.com.